8 years of marriage should have meant everything, but to Julian, it was just a countdown to a $1 million payday. He and my best friend thought I was too blinded by love to see their shadows. They underestimated me, and they certainly underestimated my father. Now, their greed has led them straight into a cage, and I am the one holding the key. My name is Elena Vance. At 32 years old, I have spent the better part of a decade carving out a reputation as a senior auditor at CipherStream Financial, one of the most prestigious firms in Seattle. My life is built on the logic of numbers and the cold, hard facts of a balance sheet. I am the woman companies call when they want to ensure their foundations are solid. I thought my own foundation was unbreakable, but looking back at that night in our penthouse overlooking Elliott Bay, I realize I was simply ignoring the audit of my own life. The rain was a steady rhythm against the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the lights of the city into a watercolor of gray and gold. I had spent hours preparing a dinner that looked like it belonged in a magazine. It was our 5th wedding anniversary, a milestone that felt like a victory. I had set the table with the fine crystal we bought on our honeymoon and opened a bottle of wine that cost more than my first car. Everything was perfect. The air smelled of roasted rosemary and expensive oak, the kind of warmth that is supposed to signify a happy home. As I waited, I thought about the early days. Julian Thorne was a man of infinite charisma and zero capital when I met him. He was a brilliant architect with a dream, and I was the one who staked my entire professional reputation to help him secure the loans and the clients he needed to build Thorne Logistics from the ground up. I poured my savings and my heart into his ambition, believing that his success was our success. Earlier that afternoon, my best friend Mia Blackwell had dropped by. She had been my rock lately, especially since Julian started disappearing for what he called urgent projects. She had sat on my designer sofa, holding my hand and telling me how much she admired my strength. "You really are the glue holding all of this together." "Elena," she had said, her voice soft and reassuring. "Julian is so lucky to have you. Truly." I had smiled, grateful for her presence. I did not see the flick of her eyes toward the hallway or the way she checked her watch every 10 minutes. I just felt lucky to have a friend who cared so much. The front door finally clicked open at 8:45 in the evening. Julian walked in, looking every bit the successful mogul in his tailored suit, but the charisma I usually found intoxicating felt like a thin veil. When he leaned in to kiss my cheek, I did not smell the familiar scent of his sandalwood cologne. Instead, I was hit with a wave of something else. It was a heavy, floral perfume, something expensive and cloying that smelled like a stranger's skin. My heart did a slow, painful roll in my chest. "Happy anniversary, honey," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I am so sorry I am late. The board meeting just went on forever." He handed me a small, velvet box. I opened it, expecting the kind of heirloom piece a man in his position would give his wife of 5 years. Instead, I found a thin, flimsy silver bracelet. It looked like something from a mall kiosk, costing maybe $50 at most. It was an insult, a jarring contrast to the millions of dollars his company was supposedly generating. "It is lovely," I whispered, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "I knew you would like it," he replied, already turning toward the kitchen. "I am starving." We sat down to eat, but the silence between us was heavy. I watched him across the candlelight, noticing the way he would not meet my eyes. Suddenly, his phone buzzed on the table. He usually kept it locked and face down, but a notification popped up for a split second. It looked like a bank alert about a wire transfer of $500,000. Before I could process the number, he swiped it away with a practiced flick of his thumb. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Julian sighed, rubbing his temples. "It is just work. Elena, I told you, the New York project is a mess. I am actually going to have to head there for a week starting tomorrow. On our anniversary weekend I asked, 'I have to go.' he snapped, then softened his tone with a fake smile. I am just so tired. I think I am going to head to bed early. I have a long flight in the morning. He left the room without finishing his wine, leaving me alone with a table full of cold food and a growing sense of dread. I sat there for a long time, listening to the rain. As I reached down to pick up a napkin I had dropped, my hand brushed against something hard, wedged deep into the crevice of the sofa cushions. I pulled it out. It was a sleek, black smartphone. It was not mine, and it certainly was not Julian's primary phone. My fingers shook as I stared at the dark screen, realizing that the perfect life I had audited for 5 years was about to go into a total freefall. The sleek, black device felt like a lead weight in my palm as I retreated to the guest bathroom, locking the door behind me. My thumb hovered over the screen, and to my horror, it did not even have a passcode. Julian had always been arrogant, believing he was too smart to be caught. The first thing I saw was a messaging app filled with hundreds of notifications from a contact named M. I clicked on the thread, and my world disintegrated. The messages were a visceral archive of betrayal. They started years ago. Mia Blackwell, the woman I had called my sister, had been documenting her progress in infiltrating my life. One message from 3 years ago read, "She trusts me completely. The inheritance is as good as ours." The more I scrolled, the more the air in the small room seemed to vanish. They were not just having an affair. They were engineering a financial execution. They spoke about a $1 million exit strategy, specifically targeting the trust fund my father had established for me. My stomach lurched as I found a folder of voice memos. I pressed play on the most recent one, my hand shaking so violently I almost dropped the phone. She is so incredibly blind. Julian. Mia's voice purred through the speaker, followed by a cruel, sharp laugh. She actually thanked me for being there for her while you were out with me. It is almost too easy. I know, Julian replied, his voice dripping with a contempt I had never heard before. I can hardly stand to touch her anymore. Once the last signature is forged and that $1 million clears the offshore account, we are gone. Elena can keep the memories. We will keep the cash. I collapsed against the cold tile wall, a silent scream tearing at my throat. It was not just the words. I found a gallery of photos that made my skin crawl. They were in my office at CipherStream, draped over my mahogany desk, celebrating their latest theft with expensive champagne. Then I saw the documents. Julian had used a high-resolution scanner to lift my signature from our tax returns, meticulously grafting it onto power of attorney forms and loan applications. He had turned my own name into a weapon against me. I forced myself to breathe. My years of training as an auditor kicked in, a cold, clinical numbness settling over my emotions. I could not fall apart yet. I grabbed my laptop and a high-speed data cable, my fingers flying as I began to mirror every single byte of data from that secret phone onto my encrypted personal drive. Every text, every photo, every forged document was now mine. Elena, are you okay in there? Julian's voice from the bedroom door made me jump. I shoved the secret phone into the pocket of my robe and flushed the toilet to mask the sound of my movement. Just a stomach ache. Julian, I called out, my voice sounding like it belonged to a ghost. The wine must have been too acidic. Well, hurry up, he said, his tone bored. I need to be at the airport by 6 in the morning for that New York flight. I stayed in the dark for another hour, waiting until his rhythmic snoring, signaling he was asleep. I did not sleep at all. I sat in the living room, watching the sun bleed over the Seattle skyline, feeling the woman I used to be die with the dawn. When Julian woke up, I was a masterpiece of deception. I made him coffee and even straightened his tie. I looked into the eyes of the man I had loved for 8 years and saw nothing but a predator. I am really going to miss you this week, he said, leaning in to kiss me, I turned my head just enough so his lips hit my cheek. "Have a productive trip. Julian," I said. "I hope you get exactly what you deserve." "I plan to." He smirked, grabbing his suitcase. I stood at the window of our penthouse, watching his black sedan pull away from the curb. I knew Mia was waiting for him just a few blocks away. They thought they were heading to New York to finalize the theft of my life. They thought I was the weak link, the naive wife who would be left holding a mountain of debt and a broken heart. As the car disappeared into the morning traffic, I felt a strange, icy calm. They wanted $1 million I would give them a lesson in loss that would bankrupt their very souls. As the car disappeared into the morning traffic, I felt a strange, icy calm. They wanted $1 million I would give them a lesson in loss that would bankrupt their very souls. I grabbed my keys. It was time to see exactly how much they had already taken. I walked into the bank with the poise of a woman who still believed she had a future. The air conditioning was biting, a stark contrast to the humid Seattle morning. I handed my identification to the teller, a young woman who had seen me every month for 5 years. She looked at the screen, then back at me, her eyes filling with a pity that made my blood run cold. I am so sorry, Mrs. Thorne," she whispered, her voice cracking. "The joint savings account was emptied 48 hours ago. There is exactly $12.82 left." "And the trust I asked," my voice barely audible. "The $1 million fund." She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. It has been used as collateral for a high-risk commercial loan under Thorne Logistics. The papers were signed last week. By you, ma'am." I walked out into the sunlight, my vision blurring. Julian had not just stolen my money. He had stolen my identity. I tried to call our family lawyer, Marcus, but the receptionist's voice was like ice. "Mr. Thorne has already provided the necessary documentation regarding your mental health concerns." "Elena," she said, "the firm can no longer represent you due to a conflict of interest." The betrayal was a tightening noose. I drove to Cipher Stream Financial, hoping the familiar routine of work would ground me. Instead, I was met at the elevators by 2 security guards and the head of human resources, Elena. "We have detected a massive breach," the director said, her face a mask of disappointment. "Confidential client data was sent from your terminal to a competitor server at 3 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday. Until the investigation is complete, you are on indefinite, unpaid suspension." I knew then. Julian had spent months planting digital breadcrumbs, making me look like a corporate spy. He was not just leaving me, he was erasing me. My company, Thorne Logistics, which I had helped build, was nothing more than a hollow shell used to launder money and hide the astronomical debts Julian had racked up. When I returned to the empty penthouse to pack what little I could, a delivery man was already waiting at the door. He handed me a bouquet of dead black roses. I opened the card. It read, "Take a rest. Elena, you look so tired. Love, Mia." The cruelty was the point. They wanted me to feel the weight of my own extinction. I spent the next 4 hours at a pawn shop in a part of town I had never visited. I watched the jeweler weigh my mother's pearls and my grandmother's diamond brooch. He offered me $5,000 for a lifetime of memories. I took the cash without a word. I moved into a small, damp studio apartment on the outskirts of the city. It smelled of old grease and cheap detergent. I sat on the floor, the only furniture being a single suitcase and my laptop. I had no husband, no best friend, no career, and my bank balance was a joke. I was 32 years old, and I had absolutely nothing. I pulled a crumpled, yellowed photograph from my wallet. It was my father, Arthur Vance. He looked stern in the photo, his eyes sharp and unforgiving. I had not spoken to him since I told him I was marrying Julian against his advice 5 years ago. He had warned me that Julian was a man who built houses on sand. I was such a fool, Dad. I whispered to the empty room, my breath hitching in my chest. I lost everything, just like you said I would. But as I looked at his face, I remembered who he was. He was not just a retired investigator. He was a predator who had spent 40 years hunting people exactly like Julian. The pain began to sharpen into something else, a cold, hard edge of resolve. I sat in the silence of that damp studio, the yellowed photo of my father staring back at me. I wasn't ready to call him yet, not while I was still this broken. I needed proof. I needed to see the full extent of their greed before I brought the Vance name back into the light. The paper trail did not lie. As an auditor, I knew that even the most careful criminals left a ghost of their greed behind. In my cramped studio, the blue light of my laptop screen was the only thing illuminating the stacks of printed bank statements I had managed to pull before my access was fully severed. There it was an invoice for a luxury penthouse in the city center, $5,000 a month, registered under the name Mia Blackwell. It had been active for 2 years. My hands moved with a cold, mechanical precision as I cross-referenced the dates. They had been using my personal tax identification number to register a dozen illegal subsidiaries. They were using my name as a shield, funneling dirty money through companies that, on paper, belonged to me. If the authorities came knocking, I was the one destined for a prison cell while they sailed away with the profit. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I drove to the Thorne Logistics office. I still had the emergency key fob Julian thought I had lost months ago. The building was a hollow monument to his ego. I bypassed the security cameras because I knew the blind spots. I was the one who had suggested their placement for safety years ago. Inside his desk, hidden behind a false back in the bottom drawer, I found it. The black ledger. It was a physical notebook filled with Julian's meticulous handwriting. But it was not just about money. I found a copy of a marriage certificate from 10 years ago. Mia Blackwell had been married to Marcus Sterling, Julian's biggest business rival. Julian had not just found a mistress, he had recruited a weapon. Mia was a professional infiltrator. You were never my friend. Mia, I whispered into the dark, my voice cracking as I read the notes. You were just a spy. The entries detailed their true goal. They were not just after the $1 million in my trust. They were documenting my instability so they could argue I was unfit to inherit the Vance estate when the time came. They wanted the tens of millions that my father still controlled. I found a wire transfer receipt for $750,000 sent to a broker in the Caribbean. The memo line simply read, "The Siren." Julian had bought a yacht with my inheritance. Another $250,000 had been moved into an anonymous account in the Cayman Islands. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning. I grabbed the ledger and my scanner, digitizing every page. As I slipped out of the building through the service entrance, I noticed a pair of headlights flicker on across the street. A black SUV began to crawl behind me, keeping a distance of exactly 3 car lengths. I was being followed. I led them on a winding path through the city, my heart hammering against my ribs, until I lost them in the narrow alleys of the industrial district. When I finally reached my safe house, a notification pinged on my phone. It was an email from Julian's new legal team. "Elena," the text read, "we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Sign the attached divorce papers. Waive all rights to Thorne Logistics and the Vance Trust. If you do, the corporate espionage charges at CipherStream might disappear. You have 24 hours. The sheer weight of their arrogance nearly crushed me. They thought I was beaten. They thought I was a cornered animal with nowhere to go. I looked at the scanner, at the digital evidence of their life of lies. I took a deep breath, fighting back the urge to scream. 24 hours, I muttered, my fingers hovering over the keypad of the burner phone. That is plenty of time for a war. The deadline from Julian's lawyers was ticking. They thought they had me in a corner. They didn't realize I now held the black ledger. I had one more stop to make, one final public confrontation to let them show their true faces before I disappeared to find the only man who could help me finish this. The ballroom of the Olympic Hotel was a sea of shimmering silk and sharp tuxedos, a place where the air tasted of vintage champagne and lies. I slipped through the gold-leafed doors, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was a ghost at my own funeral, wearing a cheap wig and a dress I had bought at a consignment shop. I stayed in the shadows, watching the center of the room where Julian and Mia stood, bathed in the glow of a crystal chandelier. They looked like royalty. Mia was wearing the midnight blue silk gown I had shown her in a magazine 6 months ago, the one I had saved for our next gala. But what made my blood turn to ice was the necklace resting against her collarbone. It was my mother's sapphire pendant, a Vance family heirloom that Julian told me was in a secure vault for insurance purposes. Seeing it on her felt like a physical violation, a jagged blade twisted into an old wound. I stepped into the light, my presence cutting through their laughter like a cold breeze. The conversation around them died instantly. Julian's face didn't crumble into guilt. Instead, it hardened into a mask of practiced pity. "Elena," Julian said, his voice projecting across the circle of our mutual friends and business associates. "I told you that you shouldn't be out. You are not well, and this public display is only making your condition worse." He turned to the crowd, his expression a masterpiece of staged heartbreak. "I am so sorry. Everyone. My wife has been struggling with a very deep mental instability. Her delusions about our finances and her obsession with Mia have become dangerous. I am doing everything in my power to save her dignity by finalizing this divorce. But as you can see, her greed has no limits." The whispers started immediately. I saw the faces of people I had known for a decade turn away. I saw the contempt in their eyes, the way they clutched their drinks tighter as if my instability might rub off on them. I was being buried alive in a room full of people who used to call me a friend. Mia stepped toward me, her face a mask of concern for the benefit of the audience. She reached out as if to steady me, leaning in until her lips were inches from my ear. Her voice was a toxic hiss, meant only for me. "He never loved you, Elena," she whispered, her breath smelling of expensive gin. "Every night he came home late to you. He was still tasting me. We sat in your bed, in your own house, and laughed about how easy it was to take your money. You were just a bank account with a heartbeat." My vision blurred with a white-hot rage, but I kept my hand steady inside my clutch. My phone was recording every second of her confession, every glint of the stolen sapphires. "Does my mother's jewelry feel heavy?" "Mia," I asked, my voice vibrating with a cold, sharp edge. "It should. It was bought with the blood of a family you could never belong to. That $1 million you think you have secured is the price of your soul. And I promise you, it was a bad bargain." The mask slipped for a fraction of a second, Mia's face contorted with a feral anger, and before the crowd could blink, she swung her hand. The slap crackled through the quiet room, a sharp, stinging report that left my cheek burning. "Get out," Mia shrieked, playing the part of the victimized friend. You are a pathetic, delusional liar," Julian signaled for security, his eyes cold and triumphant. "Take her home. She is clearly having another episode." I was escorted out through the service entrance, the sound of their mocking laughter echoing down the marble hallway. But as I stood on the sidewalk, the freezing Seattle rain began to wash away the scent of their perfume. I opened my hand, inside my clutch. I had more than just a recording. I had a handwritten list of every person in that room who had nodded when Julian spoke, every associate who had facilitated his fraudulent loans. I walked 3 blocks until I was submerged in the dark of a quiet alley. I took out my burner phone, my fingers trembling with a mixture of adrenaline and grief. I dialed the number I had not touched in 5 years, the number of the man who had warned me about building a life on a foundation of glass. The line clicked open. The silence on the other end was heavy with years of unspoken words. "Dad," I whispered, my voice breaking as the first sob finally escaped. I am standing in the rain, and I have lost everything. He took it all. Dad, he took Mom's necklace. Please, I need you to help me. I need you to destroy him. Elena, my father's voice came through, low and steady like a rolling thunder. Go to the safe house in Montana. I have been waiting for this call for 5 years. Don't cry, honey. By the time we are done, he will wish he had never heard the name Vance. The drive from Seattle to the rugged outskirts of Montana felt like a descent into my own soul. I traded the neon lights and salt spray of the coast for the jagged snow-capped peaks and the endless, unforgiving sky. By the time I reached the iron gates of my father's ranch, my hands were cramped around the steering wheel and my eyes burned from exhaustion. Arthur Vance stood on the porch, a silhouette against the setting sun. He was a man built of granite and old secrets, a retired specialist who had spent 40 years taking down men far more dangerous than Julian. I stepped out of the car, the mountain air hitting my lungs like a bucket of ice water. I am so sorry, Dad, I whispered, the words catching in my throat as I walked toward him. I was so incredibly wrong about everything. I should have listened. I should never have stopped calling you. My father didn't move for a long moment. Then, he stepped forward and pulled me into a hug that felt like the first safe thing I had experienced in a decade. The cost of a lesson doesn't matter. Elena, he said, his voice a low rumble. What matters is that you survived long enough to learn it. Now, stop crying. We have work to do. He didn't take me to the kitchen for tea. Instead, he led me to the back of the house and opened a heavy oak door that led to the basement. I had lived in this house for 18 years and never knew what was behind that door. He flipped a switch, and the room hummed to life. It was a command center filled with high-speed servers, triple monitor setups, and filing cabinets that held the skeletons of half the financial district. For the next 72 hours, we didn't sleep. We lived on black coffee and cold adrenaline. With my auditor skills and his investigative resources, we began to peel back the layers of Julian's life like an onion. We followed the trail of the $1 million, but we found something much darker hidden beneath the surface. Look here, my father said, pointing to a series of encrypted transfers. Thorn Logistics isn't just a shell for his theft. Julian has been borrowing money from a secondary market, a very dangerous one. He owes nearly $3 million to a debt collection syndicate out of Chicago. He didn't just steal your trust fund to buy a yacht. Elena, he stole it to keep his head above water. So he is desperate, I said, a cold realization dawning on me. Desperation is a predator's only weakness, Arthur replied. A greedy man will always reach for a hand that offers him gold, even if that hand is holding a noose. I am going to teach you how to bait that hook. Over the next week, the Elena Vance who had been a submissive, grieving wife died. I cut my hair into a sharp, bobbed edge that looked like a blade. I traded my soft pastels for structured black suits. I learned how to keep my voice flat, my eyes cold, and my heart guarded. Together, we established Vance Global Investment, on paper. It was a boutique private equity firm with offshore backing and a sudden, aggressive interest in the logistics sector. We leaked a whisper into the industry that we were looking for a firm to acquire, a firm exactly the size of Thorn Logistics, and we were willing to pay 10 times the market value in cash. He will see the name Vance and hesitate, I said, looking at the digital profile we had created. No, my father countered, his eyes glinting with a predatory light. He will see the name Vance and think you are trying to buy your way back into his life. He will think your father is finally opening the vault to save you. His ego will tell him that he has won, that he has finally broken us. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the monitor. I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. And for the first time in 5 years, that made me smile. I realized then that the most satisfying part of this wouldn't be seeing my money return to my bank account. It would be watching Julian and Mia reach for the prize, only to realize too late that they had stepped off a cliff. Let's start the clock. Dad, I said, my voice steady. I want him to see me coming, and I want him to think it is a blessing until the very second the trap snaps shut. Arthur did not just have contacts, he had debts of honor scattered throughout the upper echelons of the American financial system. He spent the first 3 hours of Monday morning on a secure satellite phone, and by noon, the invisible walls began to close in on Julian Thorne. It was a surgical strike. One by one, the offshore accounts Julian had used to hide his stolen spoils were flagged for suspicious activity and frozen by federal compliance officers who owed my father favors from 20 years ago. While my father handled the structural demolition, I handled the psychological one. I spent the afternoon at a public library, far from any tracking signals, drafting a typed, anonymous letter to Mia Blackwell. I included a forged bank statement showing a secret account under Julian's name containing $400,000. I knew her greed would be the gasoline for the fire I was about to light. By 6 o'clock that evening, the cracks in their alliance became a canyon. I used my father's software to monitor the joint account Julian and Mia had set up for their $1 million getaway. They both logged in at the same time from different locations. I could almost hear the screaming through the digital interface when they saw the balance $0.00. Dad, they are panicking, I said, watching the login attempts multiply. They think the money is gone. My father looked up from his monitors, a grim, satisfied smile on his face. The money was never there. Elena, did you really think I would hand over $1 million of the Vance legacy to a man with shifting eyes and a shallow soul? That account was a mirror. It was a sophisticated digital ghost I created 5 years ago to see if he would ever try to touch it. He spent months looking at a balance that didn't exist. So, he never actually had it, I asked, my breath hitching in my chest. He had the illusion of it, Arthur replied. And now, he has the reality of a $3 million debt to a group of men who do not exist. I have funneled his Thorne logistics credentials into a series of high-interest predatory loans through a shell company I control. He thinks the mob is coming for him. Elena, he is cornered. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the Vance name for the first time. It is time for the benefactor to make her move. I dialed Julian's personal number using a voice modulator that made me sound like a cold, professional executive from Vance Global Investment. He answered on the first ring, his voice high and ragged. "Who is this?" he gasped. Is this about the Thorne Logistics equity? Mr. Thorne, I said, my voice like a razor. We understand you are facing some unexpected liquidity issues. Vance Global is prepared to offer you a lifeline, but we require a total audit of your books by tomorrow morning. We can save your company. If you are willing to play by our rules, I will do anything, he stammered, the sound of his desperation acting like a balm on my scarred heart. Please, just give me more time with the other creditors. While Julian was groveling to a ghost, my father was finalizing the restoration of my life. He sent a massive, encrypted file to the board of directors at CipherStream Financial. It contained the raw data logs proving that the data breach had been staged from Julian's office using a remote desktop exploit. By 8 o'clock that night, my phone pinged with a frantic, apologetic email from my CEO. My suspension was lifted, and an executive promotion was waiting for me. I looked at my father, who was calmly sipping a glass of bourbon while he watched Julian's world burn on 4 different screens. I realized then that Julian was never the mastermind he thought he was. He was just a petty thief who had tried to rob a fortress. He was a pawn in a game my father had started the moment I said, "I do." My father had been protecting me from the shadows for 5 long years, waiting for the moment I was ready to stand up and fight for myself. "The board is set. Elena," my father said, his eyes glowing with a cold, predatory light. "Mia is already looking for a way to sell Julian out to save her own skin. They are turning on each other like rats in a flooding basement." "Good," I said, my voice finally losing its tremor. "Let them tear each other apart. I want to be there to watch the final strike." I chose a dimly lit corner of a luxury lounge at the Fairmont, a place that felt expensive enough to keep Julian's ego fed, but quiet enough for a confession. I was wearing the black lace dress he had bought me for our 3rd anniversary. I looked like the grieving, vulnerable wife he expected to find. When Julian walked in, he looked 10 years older than he had just a week ago. His eyes were bloodshot, and his expensive Italian suit was wrinkled at the elbows. He was a man drowning in a $3 million debt he could not explain. "Elena," he said, reaching for my hand across the table. His palm was damp with cold sweat. I have been such a fool. Everything I said at that party. I was just so stressed about the business. Mia, she is nothing but a distraction." I realized that the moment I walked out that door. I looked at him, forcing a single tear to well up in my eye. "I wanted to believe you, Julian, but you took everything from me. You even took my mother's necklace. I will get it back," he promised, his voice a frantic whisper. "I will give you everything back. Just sign these papers for a new investment partnership. It will bypass the freeze on the Thorn Logistics accounts. We can start over. Elena, just you and me. I am done with Mia. I will kick her out of that penthouse tonight." As he spoke, my father was already finishing the second half of the strike. Arthur had sent a high-resolution recording of this very conversation, along with Julian's signed promise to dump her, straight to Mia's encrypted laptop. I could almost feel the vibration of her rage through the city's digital grid. While Julian was busy begging me for a lifeline, Mia was at his office. She did not just leave, she tore the place apart. She stole the hard drives and the backup ledgers, the ones containing the real evidence of Julian's tax evasion and money laundering. She was not just leaving him, she was preparing a deal with the district attorney for immunity. She was a professional, and she knew when to burn a sinking ship. I leaned in closer, my voice soft and inviting. I pulled out my phone and showed him a banking app my father had specially built for this moment. It showed a balance of $2 million. My father. He finally cracked. "Julian." I lied, watching his eyes dilate as he saw the numbers. "He gave me $2 million to start over. It is in a private, unlinked account. If we sign those papers, if we really start over, I can move this money into the new company tonight." I saw the moment his soul vanished. He did not see a wife. He saw a golden ticket to freedom. He was not thinking about our marriage or our history. He was thinking about how he could steal that $2 million and disappear to the Caribbean alone, leaving both me and Mia to rot. That is amazing. "Honey," he said, his voice trembling with pure greed. Let's meet tomorrow morning at the harbor. We can sign everything on the boat, away from the lawyers. Just bring the access codes for that account." 1 hour later, Julian walked into his office to find his safe wide open and his most sensitive files gone. He called Mia, his voice full of a murderous suspicion I had once been the target of. "Where are you?" he roared into his phone, pacing the empty room. Did you take the Sterling files? Are you working for them now? You backstabbing snake!" Mia's voice screamed back so loud I could hear it from the recording my father was monitoring in Montana. I saw the video. Julian, you were going to throw me to the wolves for her money. I am already at the police station. I am going to bury you by 10 o'clock that night. The alliance of the two people who had tried to destroy me had completely collapsed. They were no longer lovers. They were two starving wolves in a small cage, each trying to eat the other before the sun came up. And I was the one who had finally locked the door. The salt air at Pier 66 was thick with fog and the stench of diesel. I stood in the shadow of a shipping container, watching the scene unfold on the deck of the Siren, the luxury yacht Julian had bought with money he never truly possessed. The rain was a cold, relentless needle against my skin. Julian and Mia were screaming at each other, their voices carrying over the slap of the waves. Between them sat the silver briefcase I had promised contained the $2 million in cash and bearer bonds. Julian lunged for it, but Mia shoved him back, her heels clicking frantically on the teak deck. "It is mine, Julian!" Mia shrieked, her face contorted in a way that erased every ounce of her beauty. "I am the one who did the work. I am the one who lived the lie for years." "You stole my files," Julian roared, his hand wrapping around the handle of the case. "You were going to leave me for the feds." They scrambled for the case, tugging it back and forth until the latches snapped open. A cloud of white paper erupted into the air, fluttering down like useless snow. There was no money. There were no bonds. There was only a stack of blank printer paper and a small, blinking black box with a red light. A GPS tracker. I stepped out of the darkness and into the pool of light from the pier lamps, looking for something I asked, my voice flat and cold. Julian froze. He looked at me, then at the empty briefcase, then back at me. His eyes were wide with a frantic, animal terror. "Elena, honey," he stammered, taking a step toward the railing. I can explain everything. She forced me into this. I was just trying to get our money back." "Stop lying." "Julian," I said. He snarled, his desperation turning into a violent rage. He lunged over the railing of the boat, his fingers reaching for my throat. You ruined everything. You bitch," before he could touch me. A heavy hand gripped his shoulder and slammed him against the hull of the yacht. My father, Arthur, stood there with 3 men in dark tactical gear. Julian gasped, the air leaving his lungs in a sharp wheeze. "Touch my daughter again," Arthur whispered, his voice like grinding stones, "and you will not make it to the police station." Blue and red lights suddenly flooded the harbor. A dozen Seattle police cruisers roared onto the pier, their sirens wailing. Mia stood on the deck, her hands in the air, a smug, terrified smile on her face. "I have a deal," she shouted at the officers. I have immunity. I gave you the files on Julian. I am a witness. I walked to the edge of the pier, looking up at her. The district attorney just revoked that deal. Mia, I sent them the recordings from the secret phone. I have the proof that you were the one who engineered the corporate espionage at CipherStream. You weren't a witness. You were the mastermind. You are going down as a lead conspirator." Mia's face went pale. "No, that is not possible." "And Julian," I said, turning to my husband as the officers began to cuff him, "you were so worried about that $1 million trust fund. You should know that it was never in that account. My father moved it into a charitable foundation for abused women 5 years ago. On our wedding day. You have been chasing a ghost for half a decade." Julian looked at my father, his mouth hanging open. How did you—" "I own the building where your office is located, Julian," Arthur said, leaning in close. "I have been your landlord for 3 years. I have heard every word. I have seen every debt. And speaking of debts, 2 black SUVs pulled up behind the police line. 3 men in long wool coats stepped out, their faces devoid of emotion. They were not cops. They were the men Julian owed $3 million to, the syndicate my father had lured out of the shadows. Julian began to shake, a visible, violent tremor taking over his body. "Please," Julian begged the police officers, his voice breaking into a sob. "Please, take me away. Just get me in the car. Don't let them near me." I watched as the police shoved Julian and Mia into separate vans. The doors slammed shut with a final heavy thud. The silence that followed was the most beautiful thing I had heard in 8 years. Every forged signature, every lie, and every cent stolen had been accounted for. The audit was finally over. "Let's go home, Elena," my father said, putting his arm around my shoulder. I didn't look back. The rain was still falling, but for the first time in years, I felt completely clean. The courtroom was silent, the kind of heavy, expectant quiet that precedes a storm. I stood in the witness box, my back straight and my voice devoid of the tremors that had defined my life for the last 8 years. Julian sat at the defense table, his expensive suit hanging loosely on a frame that had withered under the weight of his own anxiety. Mia was beside him, her eyes darting toward the exit as if she could still find a way to run. "Your Honor," I said, looking directly at the judge, "I have one final piece of evidence to submit. It is a recording from a device Julian Thorne tried to hide in our home. It is not just about money, it is about the calculated destruction of a human life." I pressed play. The speakers filled the room with Julian's mocking laugh and Mia's toxic whispers as they discussed how easy it was to forge my name and drain my soul. As the audio played, Julian buried his face in his hands. Mia turned her head away, her lip curling in a final, pathetic display of spite. The judge did not hesitate. When the gavel finally struck the wood, it sounded like a door closing on the nightmare I had lived. "Julian Thorne," the judge announced, her voice echoing through the chamber, "for the crimes of grand larceny, financial fraud, multiple counts of forgery, and conspiracy to commit identity theft, I sentence you to 15 years in state prison without the possibility of early parole. You have exploited the very person who built your foundation, and the law will show you no leniency." Julian's breath hitched, a sharp, ragged sound that filled the room. 15 years. No, please. Honor, I can pay it back. And Mia Blackwell, the judge continued, ignoring his outburst, "For your role as the primary architect of this conspiracy and corporate espionage, you are sentenced to 10 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution for every cent of the funds you helped tarnish." Mia didn't scream. She just slumped into her chair. The mask of the powerful socialite finally shattered into 1,000 pieces of common criminal. The aftermath was a whirlwind of justice. Thorne Logistics was declared bankrupt within 48 hours. Every asset Julian had ever touched, from the luxury cars to the yacht in the Caribbean, was seized by the court. The proceeds were used to fully restore my $1 million trust fund and settle the debts Julian had tried to pin on me. At CipherStream Financial, the truth did more than clear my name. The board of directors issued a public apology for their lack of oversight and offered me a promotion to director of risk control. They realized that the woman who could audit her own husband into a prison cell was the only one they could trust with their future. I took the money I recovered and did something Julian would never understand. I established the Vance Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal and financial protection for women trapped in abusive marriages where their independence had been stolen. I wanted to make sure that no other woman had to feel the cold, hollow desperation I felt on that rainy night in Seattle. A month later, I was back in Montana. I sat on the wide mahogany balcony of my father's new coastal house, the scent of the Pacific Ocean mixing with the steam from my tea. My father, Arthur, sat across from me, his sharp eyes finally at peace. "You did well, Elena," he said, his voice soft but proud. "You didn't just survive. You reclaimed yourself." I realized something. "Dad," I replied, looking out at the endless blue horizon, the $1 million, the career. It was all just numbers. The real inheritance was the strength you gave me to stand up. I don't need his money to be whole. I just needed to remember who I was. Behind bars. I heard through my father's contacts that Julian and Mia had spent their first week in separate wings of the prison writing letters to the warden, each blaming the other for the entire scheme. They were broke, alone, and rotting in the very cage they had built for me. The next morning, I stood in front of a skyscraper in downtown Seattle. I was wearing a new suit, a sharp charcoal gray that signaled I was no longer a victim. I checked my watch. It was exactly 9 o'clock. I didn't hesitate. I pushed through the glass doors and walked into the boardroom for the first high-stakes meeting of my new life. I wasn't just Elena Vance, the survivor. I was Elena Vance, the woman who owned her future. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let us know in the comments where you are listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts together. If you enjoyed this journey of justice, make sure to subscribe to the Mia Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and support us by hitting the hype button so more people can hear this story. See you in the next one.